right things on the right side and the wrong things on the wrong side.
Cosine equals 87 divided by 105, the square root of 105.
I mean, I can't always be their little girl.
Ages 3 to 6, the heart of childhood, and a time of remarkable social and emotional development. Building on gains made during the toddler years, the young child strives to develop a genuine sense of self, along with greater self-control and self-reliance. Peer relationships emerge and the foundations are laid for later development of trusting friendships. During this period, attachment to a loving, caring adult remains critical as the child's world of people and feelings continues to expand.
Yeah, there you go, right there. That's right.
For most children, early childhood is a time of delight and discovery. For Laura and Jeremy, however, these years have been marked by playing developmental catch-up with others their age.
I'd always wanted to adopt a child. I grew up in the system, had been adopted several times. We had agreed before we got married that we would adopt, and when we heard about what was going on in Romania with 150,000 little children needing homes, we decided to go to Romania and adopt one child. Found Jeremy and we adopted two.
Not long ago, Laura and Jeremy lived in Romania, largely deprived of the nurturance and care that undergirds healthy development.
When I first saw Laura, she was just a little imp that kept running into the room and running out. The second and third visit, when she became more curious about me, I actually got to see her face and to hold her, and it was instant love. I mean, she was just this cute little thing that just wanted love and attention.
Laura, when she first came here, it was interesting because she had been living at home and had been in the orphanage and was back at home and was scheduled to go back in the orphanage. And I think that's important because Laura had already developed appropriate attachments with adults in her environment. And she was quickly able to reattach to the Macaulays. Whether or not she may eventually have problems as she gets a little older, I don't know.
Jeremy was not attached to anyone when we first got him. He could not see 10 feet in front of him. He came from a white room where he spent 2 years and 2 months of his life. He'd never been outside. He was cross-eyed, did not recognize anybody, did not want to be picked up by anybody. Was just like this little zombie who sat there and held his hands and rocked, and that's all he wanted to do, and that's how he was comfortable.
Hello.
I spent a lot of time with Laura before the adoption, and she had no problem whatsoever from day one. She, it was like she'd always been our little girl, and we'd always been her mommy and daddy. It was perfect.
Laura's demonstrated what we call a secure attachment to her mother, and she was able to separate from her mother and go play with toys, and apparently she's able to separate easily when she goes to a preschool setting, according to her mother's report. Jeremy, on the other hand, has what we call anxious attachment. He's a child that does not want his mother out of his sight. He wants to be touching her or sitting on her lap. He's willing to reach out to other adults. He would interact with me, came very close to my lap, but very quickly retreated back so that one hand was on his mother.
He's emotional, and he sort of knows how to deal with it, but he's still learning. You know, he's got probably another year before he's going to be able to control. He gets very upset very fast, and it takes a long time to come down. And just holding and rocking and things like that don't work. He's just got to come out of it on his own normally.
This anxious attachment is not at all unusual in deprived children. And we worry about anxious attachment because children who are anxiously attached when toddlers very frequently go on to show less exploration of their environment when they're preschoolers and school age. They also show less interaction with peers. So Jeremy's attachment at this point is somewhat problematic. Laura's social and emotional challenges appear to have been well met before she came to this country. She knows how to reach out for help, and she's a very engaging child. She seems to show a lot of pride in being able to accomplish things, and thinks that people are there for her, has a sense that people will be sensitive and meet her needs.
Both of their development is very typical of what you see. Children who get adequate attachment experiences very early on seem to develop quite well. They may have problems as they get older, but they're able to overcome them. Children without adequate attachment behaviors very early, it can influence their behavior for the rest of their lives, and what that means is Jeremy's going to need a lot more help. Not only is he further behind, but we want him to overcome that as much as possible, and it's going to be a long, hard struggle.
Research shows that during the preschool period, children build on the foundation of their sense of self to further develop socially.
What is essential for a child to develop a self-concept is a sense of self, a sense of personal identity, independent from others. We see this emerging before the preschool years, somewhere between 18 months and 2 years. It's the time when the child begins to use pronouns, begins to refer to the self. It's a time at which the child begins to show emotional reactions to achievements. You begin to see just a little bit of evidence just before preschool years in emotional reactions to wrongdoing. Some sense of morality is beginning to emerge. And over the course of the preschool years, that sense of morality, sense of self, and a desire to meet standards, and bad feelings when the child doesn't meet standards really begins to develop over the preschool years.
What's critical about those years is the presence or absence of particularly supportive parent figures. It seems that if a child has a very positive, rewarding, approving, benevolent parenting experience, if the support that's provided is validating to the child's core sense of self, then that child is to some extent inoculated or is resilient in the face of subsequent traumas.
In Erik Erikson's theory, one of the important psychosocial goals for the child in the preschool and early primary period is the development of a sense of initiative versus a sense of guilt. And the child who develops initiative goes into situations with this I can do it attitude. This child takes risks, this child's block construction falls down and she builds it again. The glue bottle spills on the art project and he mops it up and starts all over.
Kids don't fail because of a lack of intellect. Kids fail because they don't have a sense of self. Being willing to take a chance on running, on playing, painting something, and then painting it again, and not being satisfied with it, and maybe painting it again and doing it over and over again. You have to risk. You have to risk intellectually. That's getting to know things. You have to risk socially. You have to make friends, maybe fight with those friends and go back with those friends. You have to risk emotionally. Sometimes you have to cry or you have to yell, I'm scared. I want kids to be able to go to school into kindergarten to be able to say, excuse me, I'm scared, I didn't hear what you said. That's a sense of self. And you don't hear that very much.
The people that seem to have not had this early experience do the following. They've never kind of internalized or incorporated these positive attitudes, and so they tend to be people as older children and as adolescents and adults that are always looking for approval. Do you love me? Do you approve of me? Because they never had that solid foundation early on. And so they're very attuned to approval of others, but it's as if they can't get enough, and often they don't believe it. And so they're spending a tremendous amount of energy trying to find out if others in the world still approve of them or even for the first time approve of them. And it really interferes with their functioning, whereas the young child that's had the really solid foundation can kind of let go of that. They sort of internalize the attitude. They like themselves as a person. They can march out in the world confidently, and they don't have to constantly be seeking approval from others. So the early years are quite critical.
There are sociologists like Cooley and Mead and others, who have promoted a view which is widely embraced by psychologists today and has been for many years, that to a considerable degree a child's sense of self is actually the image that is used as a looking glass, that they're really looking outward, and their perceptions of themselves are a reflection of the feedback that they get in their social environment. In fact, the child is interpreting, understanding, processing the feedback that he or she gets, and in different ways. And one of the things that psychologists study now are what are the individual differences, for example, in how children interpret the same kind of feedback or the same kind of social context. For one child, a modest critical comment can be devastating and internalized very powerfully. For another child, they don't even notice it, or they don't pay that much attention to it, or they may not even hear it. So here's the same context, the same feedback that are interpreted and have very different meaning for the child. So this notion that one's sense of self is a reflection of others' perceptions of the self is, we understand that it's just not that simple, because each individual brings their own biases, their own anxieties, their own sense of self to a situation. Typically, what we have found, and what many other researchers have found, is that in that age range between 3 and 5, children tend to have a very optimistic, positive orientation, that they tend to, in fact, exaggerate what they can do. We've done experiments, for example, where we've given children a task and we've rigged it in a way that the child's unable to do it several times in a row. And then we ask them to predict how they'll do the next time around. And typically, the 4-year-old's response is, "Oh, I'll do it great next time." It seems to be very difficult to discourage them or to give them any sense that they can't accomplish just about anything they want to.
During the early childhood years, the child's social world expands beyond the self to build relationships with others.
In the preschool period, I think it is appropriate to talk about peer relationships. There you begin to see relationships with specific other children that have some durability, and you begin to see functioning in a group setting, several children playing together in some kind of coordinated manner.
The relationships that children develop and the kinds of interactions they have in the preschool years with peers, we're beginning to understand have tremendous importance for their relationships later on. One of the reasons why they're important is that a child who has positive experiences with peers develops self-confidence, develops a sense of themselves as being a socially competent person, and that self-confidence and positive feelings about themselves as a social animal foster and help them in later relationships with peers and with others.
I consider a socially competent child one who can negotiate skillfully interactions with others, who manages to get her own needs and wants met at the same time being respectful of the needs and wants of the other, and who can engage in pleasant and productive ways with others.
I think being social is the most important thing that a child can be. If you don't know the answer, how are you going to know how to get it if you are not social enough to say, "Excuse me"? How are you going to be able to take care of yourself if you cannot say to somebody, "I'm scared"? How can you grow? How can you learn anything unless you are social enough to ask?
I think that one reason early experiences is important is because children in part create their own later experience. So it might be, for example, that if I wasn't treated well at home and now I go off to nursery school or I go off to summer camp, well, maybe there people will treat me well. Maybe the other kids will treat me well, the teachers, the counselors will treat me well, and then I'll be okay. The problem is I won't expect the other kids to like me, so I won't try to play with them. I won't expect the teachers to care about me, so if I get hurt or disappointed, I won't go to them and ask them for help. In fact, when I'm hurt or disappointed, I'll turn away and go somewhere else because I'll think they won't. And after a time, they're behaving in the world in such a way as to almost guarantee that those experiences will happen. They're being mean to other kids, so other kids are rejecting them. They're picking on children who are vulnerable, so teachers don't like them.
In one study of young children, researchers explored the progressive development of social behaviors.
My hypothesis was that if we could describe children's peer interaction from babyhood on, we would begin to see some stages of play, stages of interaction, and stages of friendship development, much in the same way that we see stages in other areas of development. We expected that the children who were more socially competent in their interaction with peers and the children who made friends and kept friends with peers would be the children who continued to be more socially competent and competent in also in other areas of emotional and social development. We did find that we could describe socially competent peer interaction in each of 3 different stages, 2 of them prior to preschool, so we were able to describe very young, very competent peer interaction. We found stability, and children who were more competent earlier continued to be more competent as they developed and grew. We also found there were some very interesting individual differences. We found that children who were able to form friendships as very young children, as toddlers, and circumstances allowed them to keep these friendships, were the most socially competent children at the end of our study.
Boy or girl, every child deeply internalizes this biological difference as they build a lasting sense of their social selves.
Gender identity is one's sense of oneself as male or female, and a sense of gender identity occurs in every human culture.
Between about 3 and 4, children start developing this idea that gender is stable across time. If you are a girl now, you will naturally grow up to be a woman. And this goes back in time also. If you are a boy now, it means that when you were a baby, you were a baby boy rather than a baby girl.
The very young child, however, may think that if a little boy puts on girl's clothes, he can become a little girl. So he doesn't realize that gender always remains the same. Gender is, in a sense, conserved. So that child lacks conservation of gender or lacks gender constancy.
Is this a little boy or a little girl?
Little girl.
That's a little girl. She's real pretty, isn't she? Tell me, Ian, when she grows up, is she going to be a big girl or a big boy?
Big girl.
She's going to be a big girl. And tell me, if she cuts her hair real short, can she be a boy? Can she be a boy?
Yeah, she cut her hair real short.
Oh, yeah. And if she wears boy clothes, can she be a boy?
Yeah.
And if she plays boy games, do you think she can be a boy? Yeah? So she can really be a boy if she wants to?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Do you think she wants to be a boy?
Yeah.
Yeah. By 3 or 3 and a half, children are very good at discriminating the sex of a broad range of people of many ages. At that time, they start recognizing that there is a link between boys and men, girls and women.
Is this a boy or a girl? It's a little boy. See, look, he's wearing a yellow sweater and blue pants. Now, this little boy, when he grows up, could he be a girl if he wanted to? No. And what if he wore a pretty dress like yours? Would he still be a boy or would he be a girl?
Boy.
But if she cuts her hair real short like a boy, will she be a boy or a girl?
It's still a girl.
Is there anything he could do to become a little girl? Nothing, nothing? How do you know?
Because he was born like that.
He was born like that. And what does that mean?
It means you can never become anybody else.
At the age of 5 or 6 for most children, they now know that you can't put on a new gender identity, at least most of us can't, by changing your wardrobe. Gender role is something very different. A gender role is the set of expectations that one's culture has for you as a man or a woman, a boy or a girl. Expectations about what attitudes you should hold, what behaviors you should act upon, what emotions you should display.
Around 4 years of age, children start to integrate the negative qualities of their own sex stereotype into their positive ones that they already hold, and the positive qualities of the stereotype associated with the other sex. So that a girl then may believe that girls are pretty, but they're not very strong. And boys may believe that boys are strong, but they get in fights a lot.
Many parents are very concerned and they don't want their children to develop stereotype gender roles, so they make big efforts to give their boys dolls and their girls trucks and to expose their children to opportunities that previously might only have been for the other sex. But there is so much gender typing in this society that even if parents make deliberate efforts, children are still exposed to this all around them, on television, amongst their friends, and with random strangers on the street. So I think that parents are well advised to offer their children options from menu A and menu B for both their sons and daughters, but they shouldn't be discouraged when it happens that their 4-year-old girl will only wear a pink frilly dress and their boy is making guns out of the toast crusts.
What is that star?
Blue.
No. Red. Pink. Puff. What color is this? Do you like that one? No, that's your favorite.
Yeah.
What color is that?
One of the things that's going on during the preschool years is children are beginning to establish their own autonomy. They're beginning to want to take charge a bit. This is hard on parents sometimes because they become willful, and sometimes what they think is appropriate and what they want to do is not necessarily what the parent wants them to do. So while they're developing a sense of independence and autonomy, they are also having increased expectations put on them about following rules, about following standards, about understanding and meeting cultural expectations. 2-year-olds can get away with a lot because we don't expect them to really understand and follow our rules. But by the time you're 4 or 5, you're supposed to behave appropriately, and you're supposed to understand what the rules are. And that can come in conflict sometimes with this desire and need to establish some independence.
Parents tell children in a variety of ways that they have to learn to control their emotions. Children also see that their peers don't accept crybabies. And they see that parents do not want acting out behaviors when the parent says, clean up your room, put away your toys.
Listen. Pick it up.
So it's primarily through the parents' requests, and it's through the child's thinking through some of these issues, being able to talk about these issues, that emotion regulation and self-regulation come together. Emotion regulation relies on use of language. So the child doesn't have to cry to let the parent know he's upset or she's upset. Rather, the child can talk about it. And in talking about it, the child has a chance to put forth his own view of his self-needs. And if you don't have language, you really can't talk about what you need and what you want and what will make you feel better.
for kids to learn emotional regulation, one of the things they have to be able to do first is to identify the emotions. And one of the things that preschool teachers, parents with preschoolers can help kids do is help the kid identify how they feel. Sometimes I watch parents talk to children when they're very angry in a way that's very controlled. I am very angry with you. I think you need to show emotion for kids to be able to identify it. That's one of the ways you can help the kids. The other way you can help children a great deal is by helping them identify how they feel. You know, how did you feel about that? Well, I didn't like that. If you discourage the child when they say that, I just hated that. If you say that, if you say to the child when they say that, that's not a good way to talk. Of course, then you teach the child to stuff those feelings. So accepting where the child is, how they feel, and helping them learn from that is really important.
Children really want to be part of a social system. They want to take on the social system. But the path for them, as they see social standards, the path is very, very difficult. And there are steps when they go forward, and sometimes they drop back. But eventually, most children get there, and that, to me, is impressive.
Developmental research has shown that the child's social and emotional world expands in many ways during early childhood. It's a time of building on foundations laid in earlier years, of getting to know yourself, of solidifying close relationships, and establishing new ones. It's a time when the world is fresh and new, and every experience a building block in the child's development.